It all started in a quiet suburban stretch where everything looked perfect on the surface but tensions were always simmering just underneath. My name is Ethan Cole, and I never thought owning a simple barn on the edge of my property would turn into a full-blown war with an HOA Karen who believed she controlled every inch of the neighborhood. Bro, hearing this situation unfold later still feels unreal because what began as a petty complaint spiraled into accusations, threats, and eventually an attempted demolition of my barn. The stakes weren't just about property anymore, it became about pride, control, and who actually held legal authority over the land everyone assumed was community space. And that's where everything flipped in a way nobody saw coming. I genuinely couldn't believe how far entitlement can push someone until it hit my life directly, and trust me, it only gets more intense from here. The neighborhood I moved into looked like something out of a brochure. Clean streets, trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers, and an HOA board that acted like they were running a small country instead of a residential community. I should have taken that as a warning sign, but at the time I just wanted peace, space, and a place where I could finally store my equipment and rebuild my small business after years of setbacks. My property sat at the very edge of the subdivision, bordering a long stretch of land that most people assumed was just unused buffer space. That's where my barn stood. To me, it wasn't just a structure. It was everything I had rebuilt after losing almost everything in my previous business collapse. It held tools, machinery, and memories of starting over from scratch. Bro, I'm telling you, that barn represented survival more than anything else. That's when she showed up. Her name was Linda Mercer, the HOA president, and from the very first interaction, you could feel the control issues radiating off her like heat from asphalt in summer. She didn't knock, she didn't introduce herself politely. She walked straight up to my fence with a clipboard like she owned the air I was breathing. The first thing she said wasn't even a greeting. It was a demand for documentation about unauthorized structures encroaching on community aesthetics. I remember just standing there thinking, is this real life? Because the barn had been there long before I even bought the property. It was fully legal, fully registered, and clearly inside my deeded boundary lines. But Linda didn't care about any of that. In her mind, rules were flexible when she was the one enforcing them. And bro, that's exactly how people like her operate in real life. They don't start with logic. They start with authority, even when they don't have any. At first, I tried to stay calm. I showed her my paperwork, explained the property lines, even pointed out the survey markers. She didn't even look at them properly. She just kept repeating that the barn violated community standards, and would need to be modified or removed. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power play. And what I didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. After that first confrontation, things didn't settle down, they escalated in a way that honestly felt almost unreal. I started noticing HOA notices appearing on my door almost daily, each one more aggressive than the last. First it was warning notices, then final compliance requests, and then outright claims that my barn was an unauthorized structure subject to removal. Bro, it was like watching someone try to rewrite reality just because they didn't like what already existed. Linda Mercer wasn't just persistent, she was strategic. She started rallying other HOA members, twisting the narrative at neighborhood meetings, painting my barn like it was some illegal eyesore instead of a structure that had literally been there for years. People I had casually waved to suddenly started avoiding eye contact. That's when I realized how fast social pressure can turn a peaceful neighborhood into a controlled environment of judgment. What really got me, though, was when contractors started showing up near my property line. I'm talking actual measurement crews and inspection teams, all hired under HOA authority. They were marking ground, taking notes, and discussing removal feasibility. I remember thinking, bro, they're actually preparing to tear this down like it's nothing. That's when I dug deeper. I pulled out my full property file, every deed, every easement, every recorded boundary map. And that's when I saw something that changed everything. A narrow strip of land running along the access road, completely overlooked by the HOA, was still legally under my ownership. Not just the barn land, not just my yard, but the entire road leading into that section of the neighborhood. That realization hit me like a shockwave. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about defending my barn anymore. It was about something way bigger that Linda and the HOA had completely failed to understand. And honestly, that's when the entire dynamic started shifting in my head, and I knew the next move would change everything. That discovery didn't just feel like a detail in paperwork, it felt like someone had handed me a loaded lever behind the entire situation. And the funny part is, I didn't even act on it immediately. I just sat with it, rereading the survey maps and legal descriptions over and over, because my brain couldn't fully accept what I was seeing. The HOA wasn't just overstepping anymore. For they were about to trespass on land they didn't control, and they were doing it with full confidence. A few days later, the escalation turned physical. I woke up early to the sound of engines outside my window, and when I looked out, there were construction trucks pulling up near my barn. Not small ones either, full demolition equipment. That's the moment my stomach dropped. Linda Mercer had actually moved forward with what looked like an authorized removal operation. No final notice. No court order presented to me. Just action. I walked out there still half in disbelief, and the workers were already setting up barriers near the access road like they owned the space. That's when I realized something even more serious. They weren't just targeting the barn anymore. They were preparing to use the road itself as their entry point. That's when it clicked fully in my head. They thought the road belonged to the HOA because it looked like a shared neighborhood route. But legally, it wasn't. And every truck that rolled in was technically entering private property I owned. That shift in perspective was insane. It went from me defending my barn to me realizing I could shut down the entire operation with one documented truth. Still, I didn't reveal anything yet. I just watched, stayed calm, and let them continue setting up. Because the deeper they went into this mistake, the harder the fall would be when it finally came crashing down. And I could already feel that moment building. The tension hit a new level the moment I realized they weren't just preparing anymore. They were actively staging a full demolition as if everything had already been legally approved. Linda Mercer was there in person, standing near the trucks like she was overseeing some kind of victory parade. I still remember how casually she was directing people, like my property was already a closed case in her mind. That kind of confidence only comes from either extreme ignorance or extreme entitlement, and she was definitely leaning toward both. I finally walked closer, holding the stack of documents I had been sitting on for days. But I didn't interrupt immediately. I wanted to see just how far they would go without being challenged. And honestly, what I saw was wild. They had marked entry points on my land, set up equipment near my barn, and were literally discussing how long the demolition would take. No hesitation, no doubt, just full momentum like they were untouchable. That's when I noticed something even more important. Every single vehicle was parked on the access road I owned. Not HOA land. Not public easement. My land. And that's when everything inside me shifted from defensive to calculated. Because now it wasn't just about stopping them. It was about exposing how deep their assumption went. I finally approached Linda, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of irritation on her face like I was the inconvenience in her operation. I calmly told her she needed to stop all activity immediately because they were trespassing on privately owned access land. She laughed it off. Actually laughed. I couldn't believe the audacity. That's when I pulled out the official survey map and property deed showing the road boundaries clearly registered under my name. The moment I laid it out, the entire energy shifted, but only for a second. Because instead of backing down, Linda doubled down. She claimed the HOA had usage rights and that my documents were irrelevant to community governance. And that's when I realized this wasn't ignorance anymore. It was a full-blown power delusion. And what she didn't know was that I had already contacted the county records office earlier that morning, and what they confirmed next would completely flip this situation in a way none of them were prepared for.